U.S. President Joe Biden says that his party accepts the choice that the country has made and has vowed that he will uphold his oath of office as promised, and also promised that there would be a peaceful transition of power come next January. These were among his first on-camera remarks since the bruising loss by his Vice President Kamala Harris to Republican nominee and former President Donald Trump. Our U.S. correspondent Sherwin Bryce P sent us this report as the post-mortem of the 2024 election begins amid a broad resurgence by the Republican Party that will dominate the country's governance structures at least for the next 2 years.
America has given us an unprecedented and powerful mandate.
A decisive victory for President-elect Trump and the Republican Party. And in a return to democratic traditions, an air of goodwill from the outgoing administration that was not afforded the same courtesy when Trump was ousted 4 years ago.
I've said many times, you can't love your country only when you win. You can't love your neighbor only when you agree. Something I hope we can do, no matter who you voted for, is see each other not as adversaries, but as fellow Americans. Bring down the temperature. I also hope we can lay to rest the question about the integrity of the American electoral system. I will do my duty as president. I'll fulfill my oath, and I will honor the Constitution. On January 20th, we'll have a peaceful transfer of power here in America.
We will never give up.
Earlier, Vice President Harris formally conceded the race in a call with Trump, promising to help in the peaceful transfer of power, but had some parting words.
We must accept the results of this election. Earlier today, I spoke with President-elect Trump and congratulated him on his victory. I also told him that we will help him and his team with their transition, and that we will engage in a peaceful transfer of power in our nation. We owe loyalty not to a president or a party, but to the Constitution of the United States, and loyalty to our conscience and to our God. My allegiance to all three is why I am here to say, while I concede this election, I do not concede the fight that fueled this campaign.
As the post-mortem begins in the Democratic Party as to their sweeping repudiation by the broader American electorate.
One of her biggest challenges wasn't about her. It was about the fact from the start you were running a candidate who was tied to a deeply unpopular administration. And once you see that, and that made it hard for her to position herself as the candidate of change, you will ask what made him unpopular, and why were his economic policies doing poorly, and immigration policies, even when there's metrics that show he's quite successful. So I think that conversation is going to happen. And then there's also going to be the conversation of why didn't he open the door earlier on to primaries, caucuses, or even her running by just running, governing for one term and being cognizant of his own limitations with age. All of that conversation is definitely coming, and it will impact his legacy. I think a president who did a lot will be also remembered for a president who was part of opening the door to what many Democrats consider a pretty radical conservative regime.
An election result born out of a majority of Americans feeling the country was on the wrong track, and a cost of living crisis that continues despite strong economic metrics.
Donald Trump won because he tapped into a lot of fear of the future and a great deal of dissatisfaction with the status quo, much more so than the average person thought or expected. The dissatisfaction really was centered less on immigration and more on inflation, as it turns out. Immigration was a great place to start the conversation, and it is a topic around which there's a great deal of well-founded fear. But as it turns out, what really turned the tide and ran the numbers up was a dissatisfaction with the status quo economically.
This Washington Post headline reflecting another sentiment. For the second time in 8 years, a loss for a woman presidential candidate, as the over 200-year practice of electing a man to the highest office remains unbroken. It's a new day in America, and one likely to see sweeping changes in how this country is governed, from the economy to border security, immigration and healthcare, from engagement with the rest of the world to how to address climate change that threatens everyone, everywhere. And while Democrats will pore over this gut punch of an election result and seek to realign ahead of the midterm elections in 2026, what's also true is that the system worked. Election integrity held firm, millions turned out to make their preferred choice, and Donald Trump will take the oath of office on January 20th as the 47th President of these United States. Shervin Bryce-Pease, SABC News, New York.